Finally, Shalom. The scary truth about Halloween. I apologize for the delay. Am I live yet? There we go. All right, Shalom, Shalom. This is the special teaching on Halloween. So, welcome. Thanks for joining us. I apologize again for the delay. I had some technical issues, but we got it all sorted out and we are live. So, I'm going to be covering a lot of content. So brace yourself. We're going to be looking at a lot of the origins of where Halloween came from, the origins of the name. We'll look at the etymology. We'll look at some of the other festivals that it was kind of tied to and where it came from. We'll also look at some of the roots of the rituals that a lot of people do in modern Halloween. And we'll cover some excuses or myths that people believe about this holiday and why they should reconsider. And we'll end with looking at a Torah perspective on sorcery, on witchcraft, and on celebrating festivals. So let's get started. It's interesting that just like Christmas, and Rabbi taught several classes last year on the origins of Christmas, a lot of the origins on some of the different elements, like the Christmas tree and different things related to Christmas. Now, if you haven't seen that video, definitely go back, look for that on our channel, and you have to watch that. So, just like Christmas, you have different groups almost fighting to claim Halloween as their holiday. So specifically two groups, you have the pagans and you have Christianity. Now, it's hardly surprising that, the pagans, the Wiccans and the other New Age cults claim this as their festival because, when you look at the decor, the costumes, a lot of the rituals, it's kind of understandable, right? So that's not surprising. But ironically, within Christianity, it's actually divided, where a lot of them say it's actually a Christian holiday and should be celebrated as a Christian holiday. And then you have another group of people, maybe more recently, that actually are coming out and saying, because of the history of Halloween, because of where it's based on because of some of the practices that it actually is pagan and we should not be celebrating it. So the question is, or does Halloween have Christian or pagan roots? And if you're a good Jew, the answer is yes, right? So we'll look at the history and the etymology of the word Halloween and why that's really why the Christians kind of want to keep holding on to this as their festival, really because of how Halloween got its name. Now, we'll also look and see if, there ever was a version of Halloween that was maybe honorable or even safe to celebrate. So let's get started. Now, the first thing I think someone did, I saw it come up in the chat. Yeah. So All Saints Day, right? So that's kind of where it all, not all started, but that's one of the reasons why Christians say this is their holiday. So the name Halloween is a contraction of All Hallows Eve. Now, All Hallows Eve is the evening before All Saints Day. So All Saints Day is now on November the 1st, and so October the 31st became known as All Hallows Eve, and eventually that name kind of, it's a contraction. It became called Halloween. So evening, Hallows Eve, Halloween. So to back up a little, all right, so where does All Saints Day come from? Now, initially it was in May 13th, on May 13th of the year 609, Pope Boniface IV, he dedicated the Pantheon in Rome in honor of the Virgin Mary and all the Christian martyrs. And so he established this Catholic feast of All Martyrs' Day. And this was established in the Western Church. Now, it is suggested that May 13th was chosen by the Pope because even as early as the 4th century, that day was actually celebrated by Christians in this place called Edessa because it was the date of the Roman pagan festival of Lemuria. Now, in this festival, malevolent and restless spirits were propitiated, right? Or spirits of the dead were kind of all riled up. And so the basis of this reasoning for to assume that this is where May the 13th came about to be All Martyrs' Day is basically because both these festivals, All Martyrs' Day and Lemuria, had identical dates, and they both had the similar theme of celebrating the dead. So this is part of the problem, and we'll cover this a little more in depth later. But really, the church has been notorious in the so-called redemption of pagan festivals. All right, so we'll address this later. All right, back to the timeline. So May 13th becomes All Martyrs' Day, and this is in the 7th century. Now, in addition, or later rather, Pope Gregory III in the 8th century, he expanded this festival, to include all the saints, in addition to the martyrs. So it was All Martyrs' Day, but he expanded it to include saints as well. But then he did something strange. He actually moved the observance from May 13th to November the 1st. So, and to this day, November the 1st is considered All Saints' Day in a lot of the Christian denominations, and not just among the Catholics. Even after the Reformation, the Lutheran and the Anglican churches, continue to observe the festival. Now, in addition to All Saints' Day on November the 1st, November the 2nd was observed as All Souls' Day. So it commemorated not only the saints, but those poor souls in purgatory. So for both these days, a lot of the customs involved, praying to the dead, praying for the dead, venerating the saints, decorating graves, even making sacrifices for the dead, among other practices. So, regardless of what people think commemoration of the dead should look like, the reality was these were the customs that were practiced when these holidays were first instituted. And so you can kind of see that even from the beginning, these rituals were kind of steeped in paganism. So forget about what happens on Halloween now. Like, really, when it first started, it was still pagan. Now, this begs the question, why did this Pope move it from May to November the 1st? So that brings us to another festival, and this is even more ancient. It's this festival called Samhain. Now, it's a Celtic festival, and it's actually spelled Samhain, but it's pronounced Samhain. So, and this is, it's a really ancient festival. Now, by the 9th century, the influence of Christianity had spread into the Celtic lands. And it gradually blended and supplanted some of the older Celtic rites. Now, this festival of Samhain was celebrated from October the 31st to November the 1st. So it was kind of like a 2-day festival. Now, some people, who want to claim that this festival had nothing to do with Halloween, really, they claim that there aren't any writings or sources, but there's actually plenty of Irish and Scottish writings that actually talk about this festival and talk about the rituals and what they did. So, um, don't believe what some people may say about it's not really a true link, because people make excuses trying to say there's no connection when the connection is obvious. All right, so and this goes way back because the ancient Celts lived about over 2,000 years ago, and they lived in that area that is now Ireland and the United Kingdom, northern France. And so this festival marked the midpoint between the fall equinox and the winter solstice. So, so the Celts believed that the barrier between the spiritual and the physical worlds was breachable during this festival. So it was almost like there's thin veil that you could actually cross over from the spirit world into our physical reality. So it was actually expected that ancestors may cross over during this time as well. And so the Celts would actually dress up as animals and monsters so that the fairies and the goblins would not kidnap them. So it was this moment when the when the spiritual world became visible to humans, and they say their gods enjoyed playing tricks on humans. So it was also a time when the spirits of the dead mingled with the living. So the Celts, thought that the presence of these otherworldly spirits made it easier for their druids, which were their Celtic priests, to actually, make predictions about the future. So it was a time that was ripe for divination. And so, they built big bonfires. They had crops and animals burned as sacrifices to their Celtic deities. And during the celebration, they wore, costumes, typically animal heads and skins, and they attempted to tell each other's fortunes. So by 43 CE, so the year 43, the Roman Empire had pretty much conquered the majority of the Celtic territory. But the Celts still continued to survive and thrive in many regions. And in the course of the 400 years that the Romans ruled the Celtic lands, two festivals of Roman origin were actually combined with the traditional Celtic celebration of Samhain. And so this first was called Feralia, and this was a day in late October when the Romans traditionally commemorated the passing of the dead. And then the second day was to honor Pomona, the Roman goddess of fruit and trees. So, the symbol of Pomona is the apple, and, the incorporation of this celebration into Samhain is really what people explain for the tradition of bobbing for apples and, other traditions related to apples. So, so the common themes for all these festivals basically included commemorating the dead, celebrating the harvest, and in essence preparing for the winter. So this was that time of the year where the days were getting shorter and darker, and so they almost said that this is when the sun god was basically weaker, and so they had to do all these different rituals. But coming back to the ninth and the 10th centuries, we see that the influence of Christianity had spread to all these lands where it gradually blended with these older Celtic rites. Now, with All Saints' Day and sorry, someone's saying no sound. Can y'all still hear me? Am I okay on the sound? Hopefully the audio is okay. All right, great. So, with All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, the church was attempting to replace this Celtic festival of the dead and replace it with a similar church sanctioned holiday. So, and these were celebrated just like this Celtic festival was. They had big bonfires, they had parades, dressing up in costumes that were, either saints or even angels and devils. So, but in North America, it wasn't until the 19th century, after mass Irish and Scottish immigration, that Halloween actually started becoming a major holiday over here. So before that, it was actually still recognized among the Anglican and the Catholic colonists. But interestingly, the Puritans of New England strongly opposed the holiday, and along with other church celebrations, including Christmas. So that is interesting to note. So eventually, by the early 20th century, it was gradually uh, assimilated into the mainstream society, and it was celebrated coast to coast by people of all social, racial, and religious backgrounds. And it's through American influence that then these traditions actually spread to many other countries around the world, and that's by the late 20th and 21st century, so pretty much our modern times. Now, interestingly, today most neo-pagans and Wiccans and other New Age cults still consider Halloween as the biggest festival in the or on the witch's year, or yeah. So there's some serious black magic done during this time. So there's no denying that. So that's pretty much like an overview of the history, right? So of how Halloween got its name and the couple of festivals that it's pretty much directly linked to, and where we can trace the rituals and the customs that are almost identical. So let's look at some of these rituals and the customs and see, where what the roots were and how they were celebrated in these other pagan festivals. So I'm not going to go over everything, but we'll go over a couple of these traditions just to give you a kind of a background. So firstly, the most popular custom is trick or treat, right? And unfortunately, this is the most popular thing for children on Halloween. Now, the children go from house to house asking for treats, such as candy or sometimes even money, with the question, trick or treat. And this word trick implies that there's a threat to perform mischief on the homeowners or their property if no treat was given. So, we talked about this time being an open portal into the spirit world, right, where the barrier between these worlds were breachable. And so there was a Celtic custom that they would give token bits of the harvest to spirits wandering about outside of houses on this evening. And so it was basically to placate these spirits and prevent them from doing any destructive damage to their property or to them, to themselves, really, or to the harvest as well. So this is how the Celts basically kind of treated these so-called otherworldly spirits. And so, on the Christian side, this actually developed into a custom that was called souling, Souling, souling. So now this, it's pretty crazy. Now this involved people, mainly children, going door to door during All Hallows and collecting what was known as soul cakes. Yep, you heard it right, soul cakes. And this was in exchange for praying for the dead, especially the souls of the givers of the food. You know, now, well, no, or the souls of the givers' friends and relatives. Now, these soul cakes were, offered for the souls themselves to eat, or the soulers, the people who were going around doing the souling, would actually act as their representatives and eat it themselves. So this is really where trick or treat, like the modern tradition of trick or treat, comes from. And I hope you're hearing this. It's not about candy, really. It's not. Um, it never was about food, um, or sweets, or anything to. It wasn't about having fun at all, especially for the kids to have fun with the Celtic festival or with the Christian tradition of All Souls Day or souling. So it's even the modern attempt of trunk or treat, where it's really a weak attempt to somehow mask this spiritual connotation for this practice. And trust me, you don't want to eat the candy, and you definitely don't want your kids eating Halloween candy. So, I actually read on one website that certain pagans and Wiccans and witches actually pray over this candy. So it's in essence they're casting spells on the candy that they're handing out to all the kids that come by. So really, we're talking about real demonic spells and witchcraft being prayed into Halloween candy. So even if you don't go trick or treating, or if you just get Halloween candy, do not eat it. So buy your kids candy at any other time. Really, it's like you have, it's candy doesn't cost that much, and your kids don't really even need all that candy anyway. So just buy them candy any other time. Just don't participate in trick or treating. So the next most popular custom, as y'all know, would is the custom of dressing up in costumes. Now, like we talked before, the ancient Celts believed that all sorts of threatening spirits were out and about during the festival of Samhain, and so they wore these masks and other disguises to avoid being recognized by the ghosts that were thought to be present. So the reasoning was that if they looked demonic, the evil spirits would leave them alone. Now, so in essence, they were going out there pretending to be evil spirits just because they didn't want to be disturbed by real evil spirits. So now it was traditionally believed that the souls of the departed wandered the earth until All Saints Day. And this is belief in the church as well. And so All Hallows Eve was actually the last chance for the dead to gain vengeance on their enemies before moving on to the next world. And so in order to avoid being recognized by any soul that might be seeking such vengeance, the people would don masks and these costumes. So that's kind of what the church also believed. Now, I wasn't initially planning on quoting any sources, but because, well, I didn't mean to say that in the beginning, that I pulled from a lot of different sources, a lot of different online encyclopedias, and there's plenty of content online, right? So, but I came across this book written by this guy called Eddie Smith, and this book is called Halloween, Hallowed is Thy Name. Now, the subtitle says, How to Scripturally and Theologically Justify Christian Halloween Haunted Houses and other evangelistic events for Christian fellowship, fun, and profit. Well, not profit, profit. But anyway, so so full disclaimer, I did not read the book. Obviously, I'm not going to spend money on, you know what, type of book. So, but um, I I want to quote what he himself said about the book in the description about the book. So he apparently offers a religious perspective to the wearing of costumes on All Hallows Eve, suggesting that by dressing up as creatures who, and I quote, at one time caused us to fear and tremble, people are able to poke fun at Satan, whose kingdom has been plundered by our Savior, end quote. I was like, wow. But wait, it gets better. This is crazy. So according to him, Jesus is more the reason for the season on Halloween than he is at Christmas. I'm sure JC is. But do you see the delusion? I was like, wow. This is so I can't even imagine what the book actually says, right? So I mean, so let's, real quick, let's break this down real quick, right? So if you're a child of the light, then really you don't have to fear the darkness or evil spirits. Light overcomes darkness every time. Now, how exactly are you poking fun at Satan by looking just like him? Somebody enlighten me. Do you see the upside down logic? And it's the same people that claim to follow the Messiah but look nothing like him. And then you dress up like the devil and somehow think that's being the light or being a light to people around you. So it's crazy, So it's one thing if secular people want to celebrate Halloween and other pagan holidays, but it's inconceivable that people who claim to follow God partner with darkness even when it's so blatantly obvious. So again, like I said, we'll go over the concept of redeeming paganism and all of that later. But let's get back to some of these other customs, and I'll try to move a little fast. So, similar to dressing up in costumes, people also carved scary faces into vegetables. Now, mainly to ward off evil spirits. So, this practice of carving faces into pumpkins, actually first started with the Celts, again, no surprise there. And it wasn't limited to just pumpkins. The custom consisted of placing fire, which they believed imitated the good magic of the sun, and they placed it inside a hollowed out vegetable representing the harvest. And it was done in the hopes that the good magic will help to preserve the harvested food through the dark half of the year. So, and that's, until the next growing season could replenish the community's food stocks. Now, the famous jack-o'-lantern actually originated from an Irish myth about a man named Stingy Jack. And, the myth goes that he tricked the devil into banning him from hell, but then because of his sinful life, he could not enter heaven. And so he was almost, cursed or forced to roam the earth with only a burning coal in a turnip to light his way. And so people began to make their own versions of these Jack's lanterns by carving scary faces into turnips or potatoes, eventually pumpkins, and they placed them, in the windows or near doors to frighten away Stingy Jack and other wandering evil spirits. So, this custom became associated with Halloween really in Ireland and Scotland around the 1800s. So the traditions associated with souling, like we just talked about earlier, included these soulers visiting houses with hollowed out turnip lanterns with a candle inside, and they believed that it represented a soul trapped in purgatory. So that's kind of the origin there. Now the other thing that a lot of people do is divination games. So now a lot of the games that are now prevalent may not be, or people may not know that they were actually initially played in a divining sense, really, and it was mainly rituals that basically would help people foretell one's future, whether it's um, you know regarding death or marriage or children. Incidentally, there were a lot of these games that were played for matchmaking purposes. Where the young girls and ladies would try to find out what the names of their future husbands would be. And so, so this time was thought to be favorable for divination because of that thin veil that we talked about between the physical and the spirit world. And a lot of these games involved apples and hazelnuts. So, in Celtic mythology, apples were strongly associated with the otherworldly, really with the other world and with immortality. Now, hazelnuts were associated with divine wisdom. And then we also talked about that Roman festival that honored Pomona, and that symbol for that festival again was apples, and that's kind of why a lot of these games had to do with apples. So now, interestingly, during the Middle Ages, these rituals were actually done by a rare few, and that was only in rural communities because they were actually considered back then to be deadly serious practices. This wasn't just a game. It was rural witchcraft, and people knew it back then too. And so everybody didn't participate in them. They kind of trusted the professionals to do these games to then tell them their fortunes or their future. But this also became prevalent in the church, believe it or not. Now, in my digging around, I actually found a digital copy of this Christian publication from 1894. It's a compilation of an illustrated Christian newspaper. It was called the Christian Work, and there were a whole bunch of articles that was all compiled in one book. And a lot, I looked at several articles from October of 1894, and they actually talked about a lot of these Halloween celebrations back then. And this is completely a Christian publication. So one article was a story about a group of girls having a Halloween party, and this is part of the conversation. Um, one of the girls says, "We're all rather tired of the regulation games and witch night tricks, and pine for something different." Now you'll see the English is a little, older English, but so then this other girl um, interjects and says, "I wouldn't give a snap of my finger for a Halloween party without fortunes. It would be like a Thanksgiving without turkey. It's the only night in the year when it is considered proper to look into the future, and with all the girls this town boasts of, I think it is too bad not to seize the opportunity." So, and then, the story goes on, and they actually do all their different games and rituals. Now, the end of the article was actually, so this is what it says at the end of that article. "We spent the rest of the evening around the open fire toasting marshmallows and chestnuts and comparing fortunes. When the witching hour of 12 came, the guests departed, agreeing if possible to meet next Halloween to see how many fortunes had proved true. And clearing up the remains of the feast and congratulating our gypsy woman, we decided that all of the witch night parties we had ever given, this one was the best. Wow. Again, this is a completely Christian publication. And really, it shouldn't be surprising. So, moving on. The next thing that at one point was associated with Halloween was pranking and vandalism. Now we talked about that trick part of trick or treat, and so really, the belief was that impersonating these evil spirits or souls would protect oneself from them. And so, in essence, it wasn't just dressing up as evil spirits. People actually took on the identity of these witches and vampires, goblins, monsters, whatever they would dress up as. And it was pretty much demon possession. And so, this led to vandalism, destruction of property, and pranking of people all over. So, uh, and this, so that started obviously way back, even in the pagan festival. But interestingly, in the 17th century, there's this day called Guy Fawkes Day. It was this new component within Halloween, and it's because on November the 5th, 1605, a group of dissident Catholics tried to assassinate the Protestant King James of the first of Britain. And so this attempt was called the Gunpowder Plot. Now the attempt failed, and one of the guys, Guy Fawkes, was actually caught with the explosives. And even though he was only one of the guys, his name was attached to this day, and so this day became known as Guy Fawkes Day, and it became celebrated by Protestants of Britain as a triumph over popery. The popery, I mean, I guess that's a word. And 5th November became an occasion for Catholics, for anti-Catholic sermons and even vandalism of Catholic homes and businesses. So, so people lit bonfires, and even they would burn effigies of the Pope and uh, set off fireworks, and so it was a very rowdy, um, violent celebration. So, they also say that children and the poor would go house to house, often wearing masks, pushing an effigy of Guy Fawkes in a wheelbarrow and beg for money or treats while threatening vandalism if they were refused. So, again, we're talking about not just a pagan festival, we're talking about within the church and within Protestantism, nonetheless. So not just looking at Catholics. So this day wasn't really celebrated in the U.S., but eventually indiscriminate vandalism became part of the Halloween tradition. And so there was a time when Halloween actually became so destructive that a lot of the U.S. cities actually considered banning it. So, just to give you a few examples, in the latter part of the 1800s, common Halloween tricks included placing farmers' wagons and animals or livestock on barn roofs, uprooting vegetables in their gardens, and tipping over the outhouses, whether they were occupied or not. So, it was pretty crazy. And as the metropolitan areas expanded, the kids took to pranking in the cities. It became more destructive with like setting fires, breaking glass, tripping pedestrians. And so, it was really bad. And so this really didn't change until after the Great Depression, particularly after 1933, because that Halloween was called Black Halloween, where hundreds of teenage boys flipped over cars, they sawed off telephone poles, and engaged in other acts of vandalism throughout the country. And so, after that, concerned adults, obviously, started organizing neighborhood activities, and this is where haunted houses started becoming more popular. And they had carnivals and festivals, fall festivals, costume parties and parades, all to basically keep these young people off the streets and off vandalism and kind of occupied during this festival. So, and this brings us to this pretty much the last custom I wanted to look at real quick, and that's the haunted attractions. So, haunted or spooky public attractions wasn't really a new thing, but they had some precedent before in Europe, and starting in the 1800s, the famous Marie Tussauds Wax Museum in London featured a chamber of horrors. They had decapitated figures from the French Revolution. But over the years, these became more popular, and also it became more and more elaborate. This year alone, in 2023, in the U.S., it's estimated that Halloween spending is gonna hit a whopping $12.2 billion. $12.2 billion on Halloween just in the U.S. So, I just don't get it, because what is it about people that spend money to be frightened or have people scare them? And obviously this includes horror movies as well. And it's interestingly, your average Joe is kind of a scaredy cat when it comes to scary situations, like for instance, they're not going to go skydiving or swimming with the sharks. They're not really into thrills or adventure. We're talking about the average person. But yet, when it comes to paying someone to scare them by wearing clown masks and, chasing them with fake chainsaws, people are like, please take my money, please, and scare me, right? So you're like, on the surface, it doesn't make sense. But if you study the psychology behind this, it is kind of interesting, but it's also a little scary, because firstly, you see that a lot of it begins as children. It begins with peer pressure among kids. Now, as a child, if you chicken out, you'll be made fun of by the other kids, and so a lot of children are forced to endure these horrors at a very young age, just so that they're not labeled as cowards or wimps, right? So, and sadly, a lot of parents even may want their kids to go through all of this horror in order to toughen them up, or so that they're not weak. So it's kind of sad, but that leads to, as adults, people eventually begin to enjoy this emotional cocktail that their brain kind of whips up. There's dopamine and adrenaline, among other hormones, or whatever else your brain gets hit with, and it happens when they're faced with these intense situations, because in a sense they kind of know or think that um, they're not in any real danger. So this is actually, so I wrote down a comment by someone talking about going to some of these attractions. This person said, once you're out of the scary situation, one where there never was any real threat to begin with, feel good endorphins course through the body. So, so a lot of people get this sense of victory also, when going through these horrifying situations without completely freaking out or going into panic mode. And they think it's a sign of strength to be able to handle the intensity of these places. Now, which is also why you see a lot of these places advertising their attraction as the scariest, or bigger and more horrifying than last year, all of that stuff. So interestingly, even the church, in the 70s, they bought into this psychology. And so they introduced hell houses. And a lot of you may have heard of them. Y'all may have even, I don't know, I've never been to one. I didn't grow up in the US, but I've heard of I've heard of these. And a lot of these hell houses are a lot like the haunted houses. Some of them even worse, and they're decorated to scare the wits out of people, right? The only difference is that their focus is on hell and damnation. Now, it's their way of scaring people into basically becoming a Christian. Now, a friend of mine told me a couple of years ago that he remembered the time uh, when he, I'm not sure if it was when he was little or when his kids were little. Basically, he said that the the best or the scariest haunted houses were actually the ones put on by the church, and that was known even among the secular people. Um, so if they wanted a more terrifying thrill, they would actually go to the church hell house. So so it's absolutely sick. It's crazy. It blows my mind. So having looked at the roots of a lot of these customs and festival and the rituals and the traditions, this brings us to some of these excuses given by people, right? So I just read this comment by that person, and he said, you know, it's this situation where there's never any real threat to begin with. That's what people think, right? So one of the biggest excuses given by people, and this is mostly given by Christian, even secular people, who celebrate Halloween, regardless of knowing what the roots are, they say it's just harmless fun. And I'm sure you've heard of it, heard people say that, and maybe, you know, we've said it in the past too, and because we didn't know what we didn't know. But if you look at the pagans and the Wiccans, now they'll tell you that really they know exactly what they're doing when they celebrate Halloween, and they know the impact of all the rituals, right? So it's the rest of society that seem intentionally ignorant about the dangers of dabbling in witchcraft. So, people may fool themselves into thinking that all of this is harmless, but really there are consequences, and we're going to look at two main problems. So, the first one is desensitization. So, with this constant exposure, people are continuously bombarding their senses with all this horror and violence and gore, demonic guises. And this is not just even during Halloween, but really during this time frame, there's an overabundance of some really sadistic stuff that we're just hit with. You can even go to the store. A lot of these stores, you don't even have to go to like a Halloween store. You just go to your Walmart or your Kroger and you're hit with it. So it's it's blatant and it's in your face, and people are eventually desensitized to the evil, right? So this is also, how like you see kids that constantly play shooter video games, um, killing people all the time on the computer, eventually go take a gun to school and kill their friends and their teachers. So it's because of this constant desensitization. And it's also why, looking at this past week, how people can look at the atrocities committed by Hamas against Israel, and either they shrug it off, it's like, oh, just another day in the life in the Middle East, right? So it's what they do, or they don't. They're really desensitized because of their movies that they watch. Everything has kind of dumbed down our senses to react to horrific, real horrific situations, and so it's um, it's kind of crazy. So, let's keep the chats kind of focused on the the topic over here. So it's really crazy, and it's pretty sick because what's worse is people actually end up condoning terrorism and supporting these terror organizations because they look at the videos and it's just like watching another movie, so it doesn't it's not real anymore. So that's that's what's happening with Halloween, with all of these pagan festivals. From a very young age, children are being desensitized to unspeakable horrors, and they're indoctrinated to think that witchcraft is normal or harmless, right? And so the second problem, or the second effect, is demonic influence. Now, this is obviously worse than just becoming insensitive. Right? People don't realize the spiritual significance and the demonic influences that they're opening doors to by participating in these activities. So, we talked about people in a sense becoming demon possessed and acting out in evil ways during these holidays. But this also, leads to generational curses. It leads to, chaos and confusion and sickness and strife within the family. And, it's pretty crazy and the list is long, right? The worst part is you're exposing your children to it. So, a lot of times the the things that we face, the problems that we face as adults can be traced back to the things that we were exposed to as kids, or even the doors that we ourselves opened to witchcraft and to paganism. And sometimes it's unknowingly, uh, but if we're a little older, we really kind of know that we're getting into some sort of witchcraft, but we don't realize the extent of the spiritual impact. So it's pretty crazy. Now, a long time ago, we were part of a small Bible study group, and at one of those meetings, we were actually discussing this topic of Halloween and the paganism behind it. So sadly, our little group was pretty much split, with the majority of the families actually being in favor of celebrating Halloween, and mostly because of sentimental reasons, or because they thought it was harmless, or because they said the kids really enjoyed it, and so they didn't want to take it away from the kids. And so the ironic part about this was that at the very end of this little discussion, when we went into a time of prayer, so we went around the room and asked everybody, if we had prayer requests. And so one of these families that actually supported Halloween asked for prayer for their kids because their kids were having nightmares during that season. I mean, can you see the connection? They're okay sending their kids out dressed as witches and demons, eating Halloween candy, and participating in all of these wicked witchcraft. And then they want to pray and ask God to take away the nightmares that their kids are having because of all of these influences. So if you care about your kids, do not let them have any part of Halloween, right? It is complete paganism, witchcraft, sorcery, whatever you want to call it. You are opening a door into that demonic world, especially during a time where that veil, if you will, like the pagans believe, is actually a thin veil. And so, you're allowing these evil spirits to just come right in. And it's not harmless. It is not a game. Please hear me when I'm saying it's not a game. Now, I'm sure, a lot of you listening don't celebrate Halloween anyway, but, tell your friends. Share this video with your friends as well. So, just, please don't do it to your kids, because you are the parent and you can explain it to your kids that, hey, this is not um, this is not godly, this is not biblical, this is actually pagan and witchcraft, your kids are going to understand. Just tell them the truth, right? So even dressing up as princesses or superheroes is not okay during this holiday, because you're still participating in this system of paganism. So if you care about your kids, you won't let them have any part of that. Now let's talk a little bit about this concept of redeeming paganism, right? So over the millennia, the church has had a real problem getting people to abandon their pagan customs. Gee, I wonder why. So they would conquer an area and they would teach them their Christian theology and their philosophy, and for a while, for a lot of years, it was actually convert or die, and so people had no choice but to convert to Christianity. And eventually, the church found out that they had a hard time getting people to stop celebrating their pagan festivals or keeping their pagan rituals even after they converted. And so their philosophy was, if you can't beat them, join them, right? So this was the same strategy that Constantine used to establish Christianity as the Roman religion. So, and ever since that, it's been the Christian way. So in this same fashion, the Celtic festival, Samhain, was this dark supernatural festival, but eventually it was converted and given a Christian context. Same rituals, same everything, right? Except a different name now. And we see this Christianization happening with pagan symbols, with temples and festivals, legends, religious iconography, pretty much everything. So interestingly, in the year 590, well, during this time of Pope Gregory the First, and he kind of headed the church from 590 to 604. He actually advised a missionary going to England that instead of trying to do away with the religious customs of non-Christian peoples, they simply should convert them to a Christian religious purpose. This was literally what they were told to go and do. So, and this is how, the site of a pagan temple could actually be converted to become a Christian church. And this is how they can take, the idols, the statues of these pagan deities, and repurpose them to become statues of the saints and the Virgin, right? So, or really the so-called saints. Now, you cannot redeem anything that is created in darkness. I'm going to repeat that again. You cannot redeem anything created in darkness. Now, the people who were once in darkness can be redeemed. The pagan can be redeemed, but paganism cannot. So the same goes for witchcraft and sorcery and astrologers and diviners, all of it. This distinction has to be clear. You can redeem the person that's been in paganism and all of these witchcraft. You can redeem them, but you cannot redeem the festivals, right? So people have foolishly equated redeeming a certain day with redeeming the festival. Remember that guy that I talked about, Eddie Smith, who wrote that crazy book? So in his delusional book, he actually, well, in the description to the book, he said, all 365 and a quarter days were created by and belong to JC. If Satan usurps even one day, it is our Christian duty and responsibility to reclaim and redeem it in the name of our Lord. End quote. Hey, sounds noble. I'm sure most Christians hear that and go, yeah, take it back. It's ours. Take back our day. Sorry. But So let's break this down and look at it logically, right? So, what is the best way to redeem October 31st? What's the best way? Now, as we've clearly established, this day is a day that's rooted in paganism, witchcraft, violence, Hamas, literally, as we've been hearing from Rabbi. It's robbery, it's darkness, and it's an obsession with the dead, with even communicating with the dead, and with an identification with evil spirits, and includes demon possession. So, how do you redeem this evil celebration of Halloween? It's pretty simple. Don't celebrate Halloween. You want to redeem the day? Don't celebrate it. It's do the exact opposite. It's such a novel concept. If everybody's wearing costumes, don't wear costumes. If everybody's sending their kids into a sugar rush frenzy, don't give your kids any candy. It's simple. You cannot create your own version of a Christianized version of a demonic celebration and call it redeeming it. This even applies to fall festivals. So you can't take customs from paganism and remove all the blatant witchcraft and think it becomes holy or even harmless. So, what is the root of this problem? What is this drive to try to redeem these pagan festivals? Why? You will see that from its inception, Christianity has sought to distance itself from anything Jewish. And the real reason why they can't seem to keep any Christian festival holy or free from paganism is because Christianity itself rejected God's festivals. It's ironic that they are insistent on taking pagan festivals and making it Christian, but resist keeping any biblical festival. It's like they're okay doing absolutely anything. Anything is fine as long as it's opposite of what God said to do. As long as it's on a different day, we'll do that. And we'll call it for Christian purposes, right? If you look at, it's crazy. It's just mind blowing that they're okay with anything except for what God said to do. If you look at God's timeline, His calendar, there are very specific times that God Himself designated for us to connect with Him. It's not that we cannot connect with God during other times. It's rather that during these times the connection is stronger because it's an appointment with the Creator. So the Hebrew word translated as festival is moed, and it literally means appointed time. So, similarly, there are times when dark and evil spirits have a clearer connection, if you will, with mankind. And so, in the past, really even now, these times were commemorated and celebrated by those involved in witchcraft and sorcery and divination. And this is why, in addition to Halloween, festivals like Christmas and Easter, New Year's Day, Valentine's Day, all of these have an inseparable bond with paganism. It's not going to work. You cannot take the paganism out. So, we don't understand everything that goes on in the spiritual realm, right? We don't understand all of God's purposes for even allowing certain spiritual battles, if you will, and certain freedoms. But when you reject God's Torah and decide to connect with Him on your own terms, you end up creating your own religion. Or worse, you end up practicing witchcraft. So you cannot reject the festivals of God and then take the festivals of the devil and repurpose it for God, it's not going to work. Sooner or later, the darkness will rise back up because, there was never any light to begin with. So please don't be deceived. If you want to if you want to celebrate and have a good time, God is for that. Just do it on His days. It's simple. And He even gives us a day every single week to celebrate. Shabbat, every single week. You don't even have to go months before you have a celebration. It's, you have the opportunity every single week celebrate according to God's word. All right, so real quick, I know I've gone really over time. I want to end with real quick the Torah's perspective on sorcery and witchcraft. Real quick, there are several different passages that where God actually condemns any practice of witchcraft or sorcery. Now, there are several places where He calls it an abomination. Anything the nations do, don't do it, right? So, what is the root of sorcery? It ultimately originates from this desire to be blessed, that is, to be successful, to be prosperous, to dominate, and to rule outside of the purview of the one true God. So, because, really the only way to be blessed, truly blessed, is to be aligned, to be in covenant with God, with the God of Israel, and to accept upon yourself the rules and the responsibilities of His Torah. That's the only way. And so people who don't want to be under God's law have to look to sorcery and to witchcraft, to all these demonic spirits to help them get ahead. And this is why people are so fascinated with prophecy and wanting to know the future, because they don't have a connection with the true God, so they're worried about the future. And really, if people just want to know, are they going to be successful this coming year? They want to know what the shortest path to success is. They want that silver bullet, the magic portion, the miracle method, or the wonder drug to get ahead, to be healed, to be prosperous. They just want someone to tell them that they will prosper in spite of what their actions are. They want unrestrained living, a life where actions don't have consequences. But it's really it's a lie. It's a deception, because there are consequences for witchcraft, even in this world, even among. We're not even talking about end time God's judgment stuff, but there are plenty of consequences that people suffer right now because of witchcraft, and the people coming out of witchcraft have testified to that. So this is the true motivation for sorcery. It's a war against God, and it ultimately leads to idolatry, immorality, and violence, and murder, actually, really. So, again, like I said, there are several passages in the Torah, but I just want to look at one interesting passage real quick. It's the story of Balaam, Bilam in Hebrew, right? So he was the pagan sorcerer that was hired by Balak, the king of Moab, to curse Israel. Now, the mind-blowing part is that, he had a sort of a connection to Hashem, to Adonai, the God of Israel. He was not a prophet of God, nor did he worship God, but he was an idolater. But even then, he still was able to use sorcery and witchcraft to be able to hear from God Himself. So, he used his witchcraft to bring curses and to predict the future and to control these nations. And so this king of Moab, actually motivated by his hatred for Israel, goes and finds Balaam and asks him to curse Israel. But what we find out is that sorcery and witchcraft have no power over Israel, with one caveat, and that is as long as Israel keeps and follows the Torah. So, you may know the story, but what happened was, Balaam tried to curse Israel 3 times, but in the end, he actually ends up blessing them 4 times. And, one of the blessings, it's actually the second blessing, he himself says in Numbers 23:23, for there is no sorcery in Jacob. Now, Rashi, a commentator on the Torah, says that, Balaam's point over here is simply that Israel is worthy of Adonai's blessing because they do not practice sorcery. So this is also connected to a passage in Deuteronomy 18, where this is where God really elaborates that a lot of these practices are abominations, and he says clearly stay away from anything these nations do. So, Deuteronomy 18:13 says, "You shall be wholehearted with Adonai your God. For these nations that you are possessing, they hearken to astrologers and diviners, but as for you, not so has Adonai your God given for you." So, Rashi continues to talk about this verse, and he says that this should be the Jews' attitude to life, and that is, go with Adonai completely, have faith in him, do not seek to know the future, but accept whatever comes with a heart full of faith. Then you will be with him, and you will be his heritage. So obviously this only applies to those who are in God's covenant and following his Torah. Going back to the story of Balaam, unfortunately we see that since he did not have any power to curse Israel, he ended up advising the Moabites and the Midianites to actually seduce Israel into harlotry, and which eventually led them to idolatry and also a plague that killed a lot of people, like 24,000 of the Israelites. And so, so we see that the moment that Israel steps out of their connection through the Torah, they're susceptible to cursing and basically destruction. So, all right, so that was a lot. So what's the bottom line, right? I'm sorry again that it went over a little longer than I was expecting it to, but we looked at the history of Halloween, the etymology of the word, and it's linked to All Saints' Day and the Celtic festival, and also a lot of the Roman festivals. We looked at the modern practices originating directly from a lot of these pagan customs. We considered the dangers of taking a pagan practice and somehow trying to imbue holiness into it, which has never worked. And we also saw that none of the traditions are harmless, and instead they open a door to the enemy to bring chaos, sorrow, and destruction. And then finally, the true way to be blessed, the only way to really be blessed and to walk in complete relationship and communion with the one true God, the God of Israel, is to connect with him through his Torah and to celebrate the festivals that God himself has given us to celebrate. So like we read in the end of Ecclesiastes, right? What is the end of the matter? Fear God and keep his commandments. So, if you love God, if you desire to draw closer to him, please don't participate in Halloween and don't let your kids play with fire. So thanks for joining me. I know it was a lot. There was a lot of content. And there's still a lot more I could have brought up. There's a lot of stories and a lot of connections to. There's some really scary stuff, So it's a lot of the study actually kind of made me sick just even reading a lot of these rituals. So share this video with your friends, and tell those who you know that are participating or planning to participate in this upcoming Halloween. Tell them, please look at the facts and don't let your kids do it, and don't do it yourself either. So let's, what is the way to really get out of this is you can renounce everything you've done in the past. because you don't know what you didn't know, right? You didn't know what you didn't know. And so what's past is past. Let's renounce everything in the past and make teshuvah, connect with Hashem correctly, and move forward. So thank you so much for joining me. If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel. There's a lot of great content, and like and share this video with everyone that you know, and let's get this message of the true gospel of Yeshua to the ends of the world. Thanks again for joining us. Have a blessed evening and have a great week.